Apple just dropped a new iPhone, and it's not what you think it is. It's not a Pro, it's not SE, it's just E. It's cheaper than the iPhone 16, it has Apple Intelligence, but it loses a lot of the features. And who is this even for? Is it genius or just another way to get more sales? Firstly, I want to explain what it actually is. Basically, for £599 British pounds, which is £200 less than the iPhone 16, you get a phone that has the same CPU as the iPhone 16, the same notch as an iPhone 14, it has Apple Intelligence, it's supposed to be part of the iPhone 16 family lineup, and unofficially replacing the iPhone SE 3rd generation. And if it's replacing the iPhone SE, why is it called E and not the SE, which is special edition? So does that mean it's just edition? What does it mean essential or economy? Apple didn't provide an official reason for the naming, so we can only guess, although it looks completely different to the SE as well as the price. And so let's have a little comparison to see if it's just a downgraded iPhone 16 or if it's an upgrade to the iPhone SE 3rd generation. So if you look at this comparison, the iPhone 16e, which doesn't have a name, essentially it doesn't have a dynamic island, so it has the notch from the iPhone 14. It also has Apple Intelligence, which previously was on the iPhone 16 and then the 15 Pro, because the base 15 apparently wasn't good enough to have Apple Intelligence. So now this is the cheapest phone that has Apple Intelligence, which is $599, and it's $200 less than the iPhone 16 at $799. It has no camera button, which was useless anyway. It only has one camera, so no ultra wide camera, which means no action mode or macro. It apparently has the best battery life out of any 6.1 inch iPhones, so it has 26 hours versus 22 hours on the iPhone 16. But I found a bit of confusion on the website, because if you look at the official Apple comparison website, the iPhone 16e has 26 hours, whereas the iPhone 16 has 22 hours, so that makes sense. But then if you go to the official iPhone 16 page, or the 16e page, it says 26 hours, whereas the iPhone 16 has 27 hours of video playback. So did someone make a mistake? Because I don't really understand how this works. It also loses cinematic mode for whatever reason, and it has no MagSafe, which means you can technically still charge the phone wirelessly, but you can no longer use the MagSafe, the actual magnetic part of the charger, which also means no MagSafe accessories. However, if you compare it to the iPhone SE 3rd gen, things do look a bit more different. For one, now the phone has a notch, which means it has Face ID, which also means that it has no home button. It gains USB-C because previously it had a lightning port. It goes from A15 to A18, which according to Apple is a 40% jump. You can even go to the official page, and if you click iPhone SE 3rd generation, CPU 40%, GPU 40%, which sounds pretty good, but for a 3-year jump, that doesn't sound that good anymore. It goes from a 12 megapixel camera to a 48 megapixel camera, which they claimed has 4 times the resolution of 12 megapixels, which is technically correct, but I hate when they said that. It makes it sound like it's 4 times the quality when it really isn't. Basically, it binds down to 24 megapixels, which it uses as a standard, and then it can do 2 times lossless, because if you zoom in 2 times into 48 megapixels, you get 12 megapixel outcome. So that's an upgrade, I guess, and then it goes from LCD to OLED. You also gain an action button from the iPhone 16, basically means you can map it to like a torch or something, and the battery life goes from 15 hours to 26 hours, which is a massive jump and probably one of the biggest reasons why people will even upgrade. And the software support is very interesting, because iPhones typically get around 5 years of software support. So if the iPhone SE is 3 years old, it has around 2 to 3 more updates left, which would put it around iOS 20. However, because the iPhone E, the 16e, came out this year, if you add 5 years, that's iOS 23, which makes it a lot better for longevity. But now let's look at some sneaky things that Apple downgraded that they didn't tell you about. So if you look at the GPU, you go from 5 cores to 4 cores, so you lose 1 core. I don't even know why they did that, but I guess it's there. The brightness goes from 1000 nits typical and 1600 nits in HDR to 800 nits typical and 1200 nits HDR, which again, it's not a big deal, but it's still a difference. It's also 3 grams lighter, and if 3 grams means anything to you, you're probably a drug dealer. This is very interesting. So the iPhone 16 has a sensor shift optical image stabilization, which I believe came on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and the 16e only has optical, so I would assume the stabilization is worse, and they definitely didn't mention that. And the dimensions are very slightly different, which is very sneaky because it means you can't buy existing iPhone 16 cases, not like you would have them, but if your friend has them, you probably can't use them because of that 1mm. And it goes from Wi-Fi 7 to Wi-Fi 6, which is not a big deal. So what does this mean? Well, basically this phone is a heavily downgraded iPhone 16 that's probably supposed to be an iPhone SE 4th generation. It unlocks a lower entry point for Apple Intelligence, which they really love talking about for some reason. And they show the types of improvements that you can get from older phones, for example, from the iPhone 11, from the iPhone SE, iPhone 12. So even they know that this phone is not made for someone who has an iPhone 13 or a 14, because you do lose some features like the ultra wide or the MagSafe charger. And in terms of competition, it's hard to say who this phone is competing with, because the S25 is around $850, the S24 SE or the FE is $549, which has AI just like the 16e, but this is technically the last year's model, which has its own downgrades. And then there's the Pixel 9, which is for some reason $799, even though the other day it was $650, which would have been the perfect competition if they just kept the price for a couple more days. But now that it's $799, it's just a missed opportunity. But I think ultimately they're not competing with Android, they're competing with themselves because they want more sales. Perhaps the iPhone 16 wasn't so interesting and the sales weren't that good, so they wanted more people to upgrade from the iPhone 11 and the iPhone 12, and they're basically saying, look, this phone is $599 and it has the best CPU and it has Apple Intelligence. And again, for a lot of people, this phone doesn't really make sense because coming from a 14 or a 15, you're losing some features, so it only makes sense if you're coming from an older SE model or an iPhone 11, for example, because it's just so old. And because those phones still work, they try to push you to upgrade with AI, which again, in my opinion, doesn't really make sense because I don't think anyone really finds AI interesting. I also think it doesn't really make sense because something like an iPhone 15 is $699, which is only £100 more. And then if you go on eBay, you can find it for $559 in A+ condition, which I understand not everyone's gonna wanna do, but it's still there and it's almost the same price. So once you take every phone into consideration, like the iPhone 16 and the iPhone 15, once all of those phones drop in price and they go on sale, and then you can buy them used, the 16e doesn't really make sense anymore. It's basically just the best, cheapest, brand new way to get into the Apple ecosystem, which they obviously want you to stay in.